Adversity become lessons of leadership, faith, and fortitude. I'm your host, Jose Pereira, and today I have the honor to have a wonderful person. She's a true beacon of emotional wisdom and spiritual leadership. She's known globally as the queen of empathy. We want to talk about why that suggestion. Karen Hall-Olsen is a woman of deep faith. She's a joyful soul, married for over 40 years. I'm chasing you because I'm going to be 39 next year. Okay. So we're almost there. and, she's
Yeah.
and she's a powerful voice for transformational leadership. She's the executive producer today of the Los Angeles Tribune, where she helps a speaker to publish their story and to step confidentially into the stage. Karen is also an emotional intelligence leadership. She's a coach and she's the chief relationship officer of the 9210 enterprise. Ooh. And she's a best-selling author, a broadcast journalist, and humorous motivational speaker. By the way, she does a podcast that's very funny with another friend of mine. For over 4 decades, Karen has been teaching that real leadership begins with empathy. Totally true. We're going to talk about that. Not only for others, but for yourselves. So it's an honor having Karen here because I'm going to say this podcast that is called Building Resilience, and this is a series called Meet the Experts. All the people that have here today are experts in their line. But I had the honor to have met this lady like maybe 2 years ago. We attended an event and Speaker Playhouse in Dallas, and I met her in person, and we have been in another virtual events. So one day she invited me to be her guest in her wonderful podcast that is called The Hero Within. We're going to talk about that too. And I had the honor to be in that podcast. And I remember that she did a wonderful teaser of the podcast talking about similarities of my story with Viktor Frankl's story. And Karen, you made me cry. I remember I was hearing that. I was crying like a baby. Really, really, you touched my heart. So, without no further ado, the mics are yours, Karen.
Thank you, Jose. And it is such a pleasure to be with you again. When I very first, interacted with Jose, he just touched my heart so much. And then when I got to meet him in person, at an event where we both spoke on the stage, I was just so happy to, he was just as warm in person, even more. And I was so happy for his hugs. He is just such a beautiful soul, and his spirituality is so paramount in his life. And he's been doing some exciting things in that area as well. And so congratulations on your podcast. And I know you've been already coaching and teaching on leadership and resilience, but this is so exciting to have a podcast on the same topic.
Oh, yeah. I decided to do this because, there has been a journey for me, but when I begin to do it, because I said, okay, I have been getting a lot of podcasts of friends, because one of the things is that you become friends. So I said, but I want to now know their stories, because they know my story, but I want to know their stories. And I have been having incredible stories. Karen, I'm delighted knowing the stories of how the people, everybody has a story why they do what they're doing today. So now we're going to talk about your story. So let's begin exploring this lady, because she says that she's the queen of empathy. And she has a story that I remember that she always tells about her childhood. Begin with that story, Karen.
Well, thank you, Jose. So when I was born, I was a premature baby. I came 2.5 months early, and I weighed 1 pound, 13 ounces shortly after birth. So just about the size of a grapefruit, if you can imagine that. And in those days, they didn't have all the medical advances that they do. And they told my parents that I wouldn't survive, but I did. And then as I continued to continue each day, they're like, she's still surviving. And they said, but she's going to end up being a vegetable. She'll be blind. She won't be able to, respond in any way. She'll be just a vegetable. But by the grace of God, I'm not. And I am so blessed because while I was in the incubator for that 2.5 months, I was all alone, and my mom couldn't hold me, or she couldn't touch me. She couldn't feed me or anything. And many times I have thought about those 2.5 months because I was left with anxiety, and I had to learn how to calm myself and how to regulate my nervous system, which was, not easy to do sometimes. But my mom, knowing that I had a lot of fears, and I would just get so scared with new things. And so she was always giving me a pep talk. And my bedtime story was The Little Engine That Could. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that story, it's about a little blue engine and there's a train that's taking dolls and toys and good things to eat to the other side of the mountain, and it breaks down. And none of the other trains will help. The passenger engine is like, I'm too busy. I have passengers I have to transport. And the locomotive says, well, I'm too important. I can't help you. And so none of the trains will help. And the little blue engine says, well, I'll help. But it's so small. It's like, how can it possibly do this big job, this heavy, hard job? And so as it goes up the hill, it says, I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. And it chugs and huffs and puffs with all her might. And she delivers the toys and good things to eat to all the children. And on the way down the hill, she says, I thought I could. I thought I could. I thought I could. And so that was my first lesson in mindset from my mother. And that was my mantra that I used. And so every time I had to do something scary, I would tell my mom, I'm so scared. She would say, just think of the little engine that could, and say, I think I can. I think I can.
I have a word that I love to use that is called the determination. And that is exactly that.
Determination. Yes. And so one of the things about emotional intelligence is having empathy for ourselves. And so I had to learn to have empathy for myself, because when I was afraid, I had to be kind and compassionate to myself. And empathy was easy for me to do and to feel for other people. If someone else was hurting or they were struggling, I just naturally cared about them. But I forgot to have empathy for myself. And so I had to learn that principle. And as I did so, I noticed that it was so much easier for me to deal with anxiety and all the scary things in the world. And so empathy has defined my life, partly because I do care so deeply. I'm a highly sensitive person. And that's one of the hallmarks of an HSP, is that we feel things so deeply. And that has just defined me ever since I've been just very little. Everybody would always say, you're so sensitive. And I am. It's true.
You're known as the queen of empathy. By the way, you have it in your banner, and she is the queen of empathy. Talk about that, how the queen of empathy.
Well, so as I was trying to brand myself as a speaker and a coach, I really was trying to figure out, well, what is the thing about me, that differentiates me from all the sea of coaches and all the sea of speakers. Mm-hmm. And so I met with all my clients, and I had each of them answer questions about me and about their experience working with me. And every single person said how much empathy I had, unprompted. That it was just their answer. And then I had them come together in a group on a group Zoom call. And as people started saying what they noticed about me, they would be like, "Oh yeah, I that's what I said too." And then finally, one person said, "You really should call yourself the queen of empathy." And I'm like, I don't think I can say that. That's just too audacious, to say that. And everyone said, absolutely, you need to call yourself that, because that you have more empathy than anyone we've ever met. And so I just thought, well, okay, here we go. I'm going to put it on my label. So that's how it came to be. I was dubbed with that name.
Let me tell you, the empathy is something so important that I always mention every time I'm coaching or I'm speaking. And the people ask me, what is a recommendation to be a good leader? I always say, you have to be people, human being. And the only way to be human being is having empathy, because
Right.
there's the way you can connect with the person. So queen of empathy for me is everything, because that's the way that really you can connect with people.
Well,
So
no
let's
wonder we connected.
yes.
I feel the same. I feel
Well,
the same way.
Karen, to the people that are hearing this, Karen is the person that you see her in person, you want to hug her. Everybody wants to hug. So let's talk about, because that thing that happened to you when you were a child not only gave you empathy, got connected with your faith. So that was an early stage of faith. Let's talk about how the faith was part of your influence.
Right. I wasn't raised in a religious home. My father was an atheist. My mother was an agnostic, and we didn't read the Bible or any scriptures at all in our home. And somebody gave me a Bible somewhere along the way. I don't even remember who gave it to me, but we didn't go to church, and we just didn't talk about that kind of thing.
Wow.
But I had this innate desire to know as much as I could about religion. I would go to the library and I would just check out all these books on all
Wow.
these different religions and read.
Mhm.
And I read, and then I started reading the Bible. And I remember one day I was 9 years old and I was praying about what to wear to school. And I couldn't get an answer. And that was so unusual for me because usually I felt close to God and I felt like he was guiding me. I don't know how I ever learned to pray, but somehow I did. And so I was praying and I wasn't feeling an answer. I thought, well, I'll go look in the Bible. And surely there's an answer for me there. And so I closed my eyes, I stuck in my finger in the book and I opened it and I looked at the verse and it said, "Why do you worry about the clothes to wear? You know, take no thought for tomorrow, for the morrow has enough for itself. And I clothe the lilies of the field. Do I not care more about you? A sparrow falls and I notice everything that happens. And you are so important to me that you don't need to worry even about what to wear." I felt like this bolt of lightning just hit me. And I'm like, wow, he even knows that I'm worried about what to wear. And it was just so clear to me that he had heard my prayer. What are the chances that I would open to that verse and read that verse when that was the prayer of my heart? And so I knew he heard my prayers. I knew that he answered my prayers, and I knew that he was mindful of me and about the worries of my little girl heart. And ironically, that scripture has defined my life. And when I start to worry about things, that song will play on the radio, "Consider the lilies of the field," or I'll read that in a billboard somewhere. I mean, it's just like that message comes through to me again and again. And so I've always felt that spirituality. And one day I was talking to someone and they said, "That's so strange that you felt spiritual when you weren't raised with any spirituality and your family didn't go to church or anything like that." And I said, "I know." I said, it really is kind of different. And I said, I often wonder, where did that come from? And then I started thinking about those 2.5 months in the incubator and how I was all alone. And all of a sudden I thought, but was I? And I
Mm.
felt like my mother couldn't hold me, but I feel like I was held in the arms of God. And I know that's how I survived, because I defied all the odds to survive. It was absolutely miraculous. And I'm sure angels were there with me to keep me company, because I did survive. And I mean, everything that happened was just, there was one miracle after another. And I've met people that have been born about the same time that I was, that have cerebral palsy or they're blind. I mean, so many things could have happened to me, but miraculously, I was able to. I have my vision. I only by the grace of God, but I believe that I had that yearning for God because He was with me during that time, and I
and
didn't
and,
I
and you
didn't know
had
how to
a
explain that.
purpose, you had something to do, you had your purpose. So that's what
Yes.
God, when you're talking about how the Bible talked to you, Karen, I remember a passage, by the way, that I mentioned in my book. When we were in that captivity, my wife one day sent me a book that is called Jesus Speaks to You. I don't know if Sarah something, I don't remember. It's a very tiny, it's a devotional of 365 pages, one page per day. It's incredible. Every day you open that book and you read a devotional, is speaking to you what's happening that day in your life. It's impossible. The probability that happened is only through a miracle. So
Right.
so there's where you can really see that Jesus in God speaks to you. Sometimes
It's
it's that you,
absolutely.
but sometimes we don't hear. We don't hear.
Mhm.
We don't have our spiritual ears open. But when you begin to open and you begin to hear, and there's where you discover that he. Remember, I mentioned that to you that when I had that interview, he never abandons you. He always is with you.
Right. Right.
So
And
let's.
that is such a comfort.
Oh yes, of course, of course. But now that conversion in you. By the way, what about your mom and your dad? Funny that they converted, or it's remained in the.
Um, no, not really. My father passed away. Very good man, very, very loving, very unselfish. He loved to serve people. He loved people, absolutely loved people. And my mom, sometimes she kind of goes to church, but it hasn't been like a paramount, part of her life or anything. And I am a curiosity to my family.
What about your kids? Your kids today?
Yeah, my kids are very spiritual. My
Oh,
husband and
okay,
I
well,
and
that's
our
it. There
family.
we go. Where you go? There. Okay.
Yes, yes. Thankfully, they share spirituality with me, which I'm
That
so grateful, because growing up I felt so different than my family, because they didn't talk about the same things that I did. I remember one time I was praying, and my early prayers were to help me find things, and I would be like, oh, I don't know where this thing is, or I was I was always like looking for things that I couldn't find. And I tell my mom, oh, God helped me find this thing. He told me where it was. And she's like, that's just a coincidence. And I'm like, no, it's not. That's not a
coincidence doesn't exist.
coincidence.
There's no coincidence. There's no
Right.
coincidence. Everything is intentional. I always talk about the divine connection. Today, everything in my life is a divine connection. Nothing is
Yes.
coincidence. So let's talk
Right.
about how you converted that in the study of the neuroscience in leadership. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's very interesting with neuroscience, because I was learning about how the brain worked, and I was so curious about how the brain worked. With my dad is a psychologist, so I love to talk about relationships, and then I was so interested in why I was always asking my mom and dad, even as a little girl, why did those people act that way? It was so curious to me, because I thought, well, surely they recognize that hurts somebody's feelings. Why would they do such a thing? But
Yeah.
I didn't realize that they didn't feel things, as strongly as I did. And so I grew up thinking that there was something wrong with me because I was so sensitive. But as I learned about neuroscience and about the wiring in our brain of an HSP, that it's actually a DNA process, that there are, of all the species, I mean, plants, animals, insects, there are highly sensitive creatures besides humans. And I was like, seriously? It's like the wiring of my brain. It's not because something's wrong with me. That's just the way that I was designed by God. I was so grateful. Well, that fascinated me. Then I had to know more about the brain, and I wanted to know, well, what happens, and why do these interactions? I was always interested in relationships. Why is this a difficult thing? Why does that person get triggered, and why do they act that way? And that was how I learned about, when we regulate our nervous system and we calm ourselves, the mirror neurons in our brain are activated. And then when I'm around someone else, I activate your mirror neurons. So I can help calm you as I calm myself. If you're agitated and you're feeling escalated and your emotions are just rising, you aren't able to access your prefrontal cortex as well. You don't have enough resources to use that part of your brain. And so we don't think as logically. We're irrational. We can be reactive instead of being calm and grounded and proactive. and we talked about this with when you and I about the stimulus and the response, the pause between that stimulus that happens and the choice that we make to respond. There's that gap in there. Well, when your emotions are escalated, that gap is very short and you may not even know it's there. But as you're able to calm, you're able to think more clearly during that moment, and then you can make a more intentional decision. So I was fascinated by that too, and I was like, well, how do we do that? So as I learned that I could actually impact you. I could calm your nervous system as I calmed my own nervous system through those mirror neurons. And I was like, wow, I don't even have to talk to you to do that. I can just use the tools that I know to activate my parasympathetic nervous system. And by doing so, you automatically calm. Your nervous system starts to relax. You'll feel it in your shoulders will calm. And you may have noticed this if you ever go into a situation and someone's really stressed, it can cause you to feel a little bit more stressed. But if you're stressed and you go into a situation and someone is calm and they're talking with a relaxed voice and soothing, that can calm you as well. So it's very powerful the way that our nervous system impacts other people's nervous system. And learning about the neuroscience, I'm just a geek when it comes to science anyway. I studied science at the university and I love the medical field. And so learning about the brain and all the different ways that the brain is activated and the different neurons that are activated just fascinates me. I can't get enough of it. I just love studying. And that enabled me to help teach my clients, because many times people don't realize, oh, that's why. And when they understood why things were happening within their brain and the rest of their body, then they could take the judgment out of it and they could be more loving and more empathetic to yourself, just like I was when I said, oh, it's not like there's something wrong with me that I'm so sensitive. This is the way that my brain was designed and this is the way it operates. Not that I can't improve upon the way that it was designed, but when I dropped that judgment toward myself, I was able to regulate my nervous system so much quicker when I didn't judge myself so harshly.
It's so incredible what you're talking about that we have another show only to talk about that. Let me mention you something. This is my book, and if you see here in this dedication, this is Dr. Brian Klossner. He's the director of the Wake Medical Center, where I attended when I was in my trauma recovery when I came back. We became friends, and I asked him to do the prologue of my book. This guy, I remember when I came back that I had like 2 weeks in that center, and one day talking with him, he was so fascinated what happened with us, how we managed our captivity, and look what he told me. There's where I got to get fascinated about the brain, because he was talking about that we were doing so much daily routines that we always had turn on the prefrontal cortex, not the amygdala. That is, the amygdala is in the back. It's where all this infuse of cortisol. And he was telling us that we inadvertently was doing things to be focused, to be calm and focused. And I begin to think, okay, so now being calm and focused. So what we're talking today is exactly that. Is something incredible. And there is something else. You're talking about how you can influence the other. The pastor of my church, he has a book called How You Can Create Your Own Atmosphere. And when you talk about atmosphere, it's exactly that you are vibing in a symphony, and you take that symphony up to the level that all the space where you are get covered with that atmosphere. So you said the word, you can make that happen in the others. So we can stay hours talking about this, but this is not the intention of the show. So let's talk about women in leadership, because I know that you empower women. So I know there's something big for you. Talk about that.
Yes. So as we were, yes, we could talk about this for hours. So one of the interesting things about women as leaders, so I teach these concepts to men and women. But the thing that's interesting about women leaders is that there's been a traditional role in leadership, which is do what I say because I said to do it. And there's not time to explain, just do it. And there's been some issues of control, some issues of dominance. And the difference with women is most women are raised where we talk about feelings more. And because we're oftentimes the nurturers, the caretakers of the society, we are adept at recognizing emotions because we have to see if there's danger. We're scanning the environment to make sure that we can protect our offspring and looking for any of those kinds of signs. Our brain is wired differently, where the two hemispheres are more connected. And so people talk about how a man's brain is like waffle squares, and how a woman's brain is like spaghetti, and it just like everything is connected. And it's really quite funny when you have these conversations stereotypically, because everything is like you're thinking about one thing and you can multitask, with that feminine energy, but the masculine energy is much more compartmentalized. So as with this feminine energy, a woman can detect nuances and subtleties. She can sense energy. She can tell that something is off. For example, when there are interactions, a lot of times CEOs ask me to come with them and to tell them what I observe in interviews or in high stakes meetings, because they want to know, or they'll have me watch a video and they'll say, what do you see? What's happening with that? And so, for example, the man will be talking and the person that they're talking about will just move back. And I'll say, well, they just disengaged right there. There was something that they felt uncomfortable with. Well, how did you know? Well, because I saw them move back. Well, that was like not even an issue. I mean, it was just like it just totally passed by their recognition. And so as a woman can oftentimes pick up on those subtle differences, on that energy, on the way that a person's tone of voice changes. I remember I was talking to a man one time about the tone of voice that he was using and talking to someone, and he said, "I'm tone deaf." I just laughed so hard because he didn't even know what I was referring to. I was like, well, can you tell what you're communicating? There's a difference in what the person feels when you have a different tone in your voice. And so a woman is a very powerful leader because she has these skills. She has the ability to use that language because she's used it most of her life, traditionally, stereotypically, and that gives her greater ability to access emotional intelligence. And with some extra help, she's able to do that. Now, men have strengths as well. In a crisis, it can be very interesting to see the differences between the men and the women. But one of the things that happens is that many times, for example, in fire department crews, it was all male for years and years and years. It was just all men were firefighters. Well, then they started recognizing that in those crisis moments that they didn't have the same ability to nurture because they were worried about putting out the fire. But the people that were experiencing the fire were traumatized, and their job was to put the fire out. But when they had a female firefighter, she was able to nurture and calm the nervous system of those people that had been traumatized through the experience, which made the firefighter's job much easier. So everybody had a different role. Many women actually put out the fires too, but they noticed that there were strengths that women had, that when they were involved in leadership roles, they could impact the environment, and from the top down, they could teach these very important skills of pausing before they react, and encouraging people to take that time to regulate their nervous system so that they could access their prefrontal cortex, so that they could be more calm and more rational. The other huge difference for women in that area is that when I come into a situation and I feel calm, you feel safer, and you will feel more safe to share what you know. So if you have a problem that's going on and you come in and the person dismisses you and it's like, what do you want? Well, you might not feel safe to tell exactly what you're thinking, or your fears that you have, or some issue that you've noticed that needs to be resolved, because maybe someone's going to criticize you for that. But when you feel safe and you can share it, the person that's being heard feels very valued. The person that needs to hear that information gains so much more knowledge, because the people in the trenches can give the leader so much information to help them be more successful in leading their team. And then what happens when I see you and I hear you and I understand you and I appreciate you for communicating with me, you have more loyalty. You are more engaged. That's one of the biggest problems with today, is that employees are not engaged. And so they have less productivity. They aren't communicating. I mean, there's so many medical errors because the nurse doesn't want to tell the doctor because he might bark at her and bite her head off. I know what I'm doing. I don't need you to tell me what to do. And so she just stays quiet, and then the wrong medication is given. People have had the wrong limbs amputated because, or a limb amputated when they were supposed to have a different surgery because someone didn't speak up because of the way that they were treated when they weren't safe to say things. So they just kept quiet. That's huge, the difference that a leader could make. And so when a woman is able to provide that kind of environment, then she lives in that space of the pause, and then she's able to help others be more proactive and to be seen and to be heard, and that creates that loyalty. One of the interesting things about emotional intelligence is that Harvard Business Review did a study on it, and so many corporate, options were saying, if we have money and all of a sudden things dry up, what are we going to cut first? The budget cuts are going to go toward training. We don't have enough money to spend there because we've got to save for the bottom line. So it was called a soft skill. It wasn't something that they could really measure for many years. But then they found that if they invested in this training, if they did emotional intelligence training and taught the employees how to respond to the client, how the leader could have this emotional intelligence with their team, the productivity went up and the engagement went up and the profitability went up. And they were like, we can actually measure this. There is a bottom line dollar benefit to the company. In addition, there was less turnover. So there was less money spent on training again and again and again. And I thought that was so fascinating, the difference that emotional intelligence made for leaders and within the whole organization.
Well, that's incredible. See, I'm today part of this organization called Conscious Capitalism. Okay, I'm here in the Houston chapter, and one of the things that this organization does is try to help leaders to be more conscious, not only thinking in the money, thinking in the employees, being more empathetic, because 80% of the companies that take care of their employee are the most successful companies. Yep. So money-wise, so if you, I tell the people, if you want to have the secret sauce, treat fairly your employees, because that will make them not only be more engaged with you, they're going to be more loyal.
Absolutely.
They're going to be more loyal. They will see you like a model. You will inspire them. So it changed everything. Really, really changed everything. By the way, you were talking about the nurse, and I was remembering one of my guests that I'm going to have maybe a couple of weeks. I already interviewed her. She has a story with that she almost lost her leg because the nurse never told the doctor did a malpractice, and she almost lost her leg because of that. So you were talking about the right example, and that is right. The people don't talk. Sometimes the people get quiet because they have fears, and that's the thing that happened when today we talk about servant leadership, and servant leadership is exactly that, thinking that people serve before and then the money comes after. That is incredible. So, Karen, so now your life has been evolving, more involved with women, more involved with neuroscience, more involved with emotional intelligence. How you came with the podcast? How that podcast idea came?
Well, anybody that knows me from when I was young, they are shocked that I started a podcast because I was, like I mentioned, I was so afraid. I was scared to speak in front of groups. I didn't have a problem talking to other people. I love to talk to people, but I did not like speaking in a group. I got very embarrassed. My voice would start to shake when everybody's eyes were on me. And so I didn't even like to hear my voice on a tape recorder if nobody, I was like, that is that how I sound? It just sounded terrible to me. So I just stayed away from anything. And my mom said, you should take a public speaking class. And I'm like, no, no, no. And she said, why don't you run for student council? And so she helped encourage this leadership within me. And I had so much fun. And then she said, why don't you take a drama class? And I'm like, and be on stage? Heck no. Well, she encouraged me. My mom's very persuasive. So I took a drama class. And then when I went to college, she said it again. I think you should take a public speaking class. So I did. And when I saw the light bulb go off in people's eyes when I told a story and they could relate to what I said, I was like, oh, we connected right then. And connection for me is like air. And so I really enjoyed that. I started to do more presentations. I became a professor at the university. I absolutely loved it. But what I was doing, they didn't have podcasts back then. So what I was doing was I was going to write a book. So I started interviewing all the people for my book, but I didn't know how to market my book. And so I realized, somebody said to me, well, you could do a podcast. And I was like, oh yeah, I could do a podcast. I could do that for free. And I wouldn't have to charge anybody. And they could just listen and learn. And I could interview all the people. And so I first had to overcome that fear of hearing my voice. And then I had to figure out how to do the podcast. But it brought me so much joy. Just like you said, I felt the exact same way that all of my guests became my friends. And I loved my guests. I fell in love with you when I interviewed you. And it just made me so happy. I felt so much joy in my heart. And that was how I started the podcast, was because the reason why I was writing the book was because in so many of the experiences of adversity that I had gone through, I felt very alone. And I would tell people what I was going through, and they would just look at me like, I can't relate. And I kept telling different people, thinking maybe I'd find someone that could relate, but I never could find anyone that could relate. So I decided I'm going to write a book. Maybe there's somebody out there that feels like I do. And maybe if they read somebody's story in my book, they won't feel so alone. Well, then when I did the podcast, that was the motivation. I didn't want anybody to go through life feeling like they were the only one like I had. And I wanted people to know that they weren't alone, that someone's story could resonate with them and they could understand, oh, they felt that same way. And we don't have to have the same experience to have the same feelings. Correct. I haven't gone through what you did being held captive, in Venezuela, but I have felt abandoned. I have felt incredible loneliness. I have felt isolated, not to the degree that you have, but I felt the same feeling. And so I could relate when you told me the story, and other people can relate to each other on a feeling level. And that is very powerful to know. That helps us to not feel so alone. That helps us to unify and bridge those barriers in this very divided and isolated world. Loneliness is an epidemic, and loneliness, we're getting more and more lonely as a society, and we need those connections. We need connection more today than ever. And that was the reason why I started my podcast.
The audience that are hearing her podcast, The Hero Within. So not only that connection, Karen, because the beautiful thing that you do is the way you express, the way, because I've been hearing your podcast since then. I always are hearing your podcast, and you always put that emphasis in that the people show that they're not alone, and then the people see that they are heard and they are seen. And let me tell you, and as you said, people doesn't have to go into my situation, but when I speak, I tell the people that maybe they are not a physical hostage, but they can be a mental hostage, and sometimes they can be even worse to be a physical hostage. So yeah, connection is necessary, and today I truly believe that people need more and more connection. The good thing is that there are a lot of people trying to do the same. I see like a big movement of people trying to do a change in the world, and you are one of them. So,
Oh,
so,
thank you.
so now comes the podcast. I remember that when I met you doing the podcast, and we had the opportunity to meet us in person. You were not still working in the LA Tribune. How that came after?
Yeah. Well, because of my podcast, they had listened to my podcast, and because I asked them, how did this happen? When they told me the story, they had listened to my podcast, and one of the things that impressed them was the spiritual focus that I had on the podcast and the stories of overcoming. And so they invited me to be a part of the podcast network and to be a part of the Women's Journal. And then as I was publishing stories of women and entrepreneurs and women in different areas of life, it was just like interviewing them for my podcast, and I just had so much fun. And then I was training them on how to speak on stage and how to overcome their fears, which I had to work on again and again. I still have to work on it for myself. And then they started noticing that, and they said, would you like to host events and interview the guest on the broadcast? And I said, well, sure. So I started interviewing guests, and then they said, would you like to help produce the events? And I was like, well, yes, of course. So I started learning how to produce, and then they said, okay, you can do it. You're now can be an executive producer, put the whole event together, get the speakers, choose the topic, do the broadcast, run the technology, and stream it to the world. And that was a really exciting day when I had that opportunity. And it all came about because of my podcast, and because I truly love interviewing my guests, and that just brought so much joy to me to be able to have a platform. One of the things that I really appreciate is that, being so shy and not using my voice for so long, I now am a voice to those people like me who are voiceless. And when I speak, I realize that I'm giving them permission to speak. I'm sharing their story in many ways. And then as they hear me, how I have overcome my fears, it gives them permission to work on overcoming their fears. And as I do work with people and I help them to gain that confidence to not only publish their story, but to speak on stage, it thrills me. It just thrills me to watch them get up and take that microphone and share their story, and to have confidence as they do so. And one of the things that I often say to them is, don't think about yourself. That's hard to do, but think about those people. How can you serve and bless those people and be that conduit for God to give you the message, because he knows what those people need, and he will loose your tongue so that
Yes,
you
yes.
can deliver that message the way that he wants to touch their heart. And when I remember that, then I'm good. Then I'm golden. Then I can say what I need to say. But even to this day, I have to remember that. I always pray before I speak, because I want to be an instrument in God's hands to deliver that message to help bless other people. I want them to feel close to God. I want them to know they are loved. I want them to know that he cares. And just like me, he hears and answers our prayers, and even the desires of our heart. Even if we don't know how to pray, he knows the desires of our heart, and he will answer us. And that's a beautiful thing. So speaking on stage has been thrilling for me. Overcoming my fears was thrilling for me, and now helping other people to share the thing that they're passionate about, to get out there and to get that message out there, just makes me so happy to be able to do that.
Let me tell you something, Karen. Today, when I had to speak, I decided not to read too much the script. I tell Holy Spirit guide and make put the words in my mouth, and that's the way I
Yes.
decided to do it. And sometimes when I hear the recording, I said, "Hey, why you said that?" Holy
I
Spirit,
know.
so yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. But you have multiple hats, because now the podcast, now the coaching, now the LA Tribune, all those big events. But there's much more, because now there is a now there is a media company and a film project. Let's talk about that.
Yes. So it's been very exciting for me to be a chief relationship officer at 90210 Enterprise. And I have just loved working with people and helping build relationships and leading in my favorite topic of relationships. It just thrills me. And as I've been doing so, I've been interacting with people in the film industry in LA. There's a lot of people that are doing movies and film. And I've had numerous people that have contacted me because of the things that I speak about and because of my interviews. They've watched my interviews and they say, there's a different chemistry with you and your guest. And so I've been approached by several different producers about doing a film. So I can't say any more yet, but but that is the next thing that I am working on. That who would ever think that this little girl that was scared to death to speak, that was, from a small town. I'm not from LA or anything like that. But ironically, my mom was born in Los Angeles. And so I love California and I grew up there. And so now I'm in the other side, where it just makes me so happy to think, wow, this could be so exciting to be able to share this story, not just with the podcast, not just on the stages, but in an even bigger way. So that's one of the things that I am doing. And my media company, because every person that speaks wants to be able to have more visibility. And since I love writing and I'm already writing articles and I've written one book, I'm writing another book, because I love writing, I was like, well, I could write an article about another article about you. I'm already writing articles about my speakers, but I could do it in additional ways and then send that to the world, because now I can send it to hundreds of media companies and publish it on different countries and different outlets and get it on TV. So that's been really exciting for me to be able to do that for other people as well. And just, again, it just brings me so much joy to help them accomplish their mission and to be able to be heard, to be seen and heard, just like you said, and to be able to reach the people that need their message.
So the media company is to the guests that you have to make them have more visibility. Basically, is that
right? Yeah. So it's not with the Tribune. It's a separate media company.
Okay. So and the film, where is the status of the film today? Where you are today?
So we're in negotiations at the moment. So
okay.
So I can't announce anything yet.
Oh, okay. By the way, I had a meeting today too. So my story is kind of in the same stage. Today I had a conversation too. So let's see how it goes too. So I'm very excited for that.
Well, I'm Karen, so excited for you.
I always say everybody has a story to tell. I'm getting so much fun knowing the stories of the people, because sometimes you see the person and you know what they're doing, but you don't know why they're doing that. What's the real story behind? And when you know the stories, it comes the wow. So yes. We're coming almost to the end, Karen. That has been a wonderful conversation. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to tell the people where they can find you, what you can offer to them, that your 5-minute pitch.
Okay. Well, the easiest place to find me is on LinkedIn. You do have to put Karen Hall, Queen of Empathy, because there's so many people named Karen Hall. So I had to find another way to help distinguish me from other people. So it's Karen Hall, Queen of Empathy. And you can find me on Facebook as well. And you can send me a message if you want to message me. My podcast, so I have the Hero Within, and then my comedy show that you had mentioned is Unstoppable AF, which is unstoppable and funny. and then I have The Empathy Advantage is my other podcast. And so anywhere that you would like to reach out to me, I would love to connect with you. It just makes me so happy when I hear from people. And if you're looking to share your story by publishing your story or by sharing it on stage, please let me know, because I have many different stage opportunities and places where you can share your story. I have many connections. You never know. You might share your story on my stage, and a filmmaker that I know might watch you and say, let's make a movie out of your story, just like they're making a movie out of Jose's story. So that's the exciting thing. And as I said, I want to help you to be seen and heard and to feel that your message matters, because it does matter. It matters to not just you, but matters to the person that is out there that needs to know that they aren't alone. So continue to share your story, continue to speak, continue to work on improving your gift to share that message, and you will be blessed to be able to do that, because you have something very unique. Every person, even if we tell, Jose and I might talk about the same thing about resilience, but we have different experiences. We have different feelings and thoughts about the thing that we went through and how we got there. And so Jose will reach, we could talk to the same group and Jose will reach different people than I will. And that's the beauty of it. There's plenty to go around. There is enough and more to spare. So you don't have to worry, well, oh no, they're talking about resilience. I can't talk about that. Yes, you can. There are people that need you and your unique gifts.
You're so true what you're saying. I have a networking group here in Houston that we meet every Friday. And, it's a very interesting group. And it's a senior group, by the way. And there's a round that you had to bring speakers. So this month I had to bring the speaker of the month every Friday. So I invited a friend that he has an interesting story that he lost his eye, and how he kind of became a speaker now. And he was talking about leadership and resilience. And I was hearing him, I went with my wife, and my wife was telling that he's talking exactly the same thing that you talk, but in a different way. He was talking from his experience. It got so beautiful because we were talking about the same thing. I saw his slides, literally were the same thing I say, but based on his story. So he was talking based on his story, getting to the same topics in a different way through his experience. So you said it very well. You're talking about how you had to pause and be calm. I do the same, but you have your experience. Right. I have my experience. So
right,
people have to tell their story. So Karen, coming to the end.
I have to say, Jose, I have to say one more thing that I think is so interesting about telling our story. And I would imagine that this is the same thing that you experienced as well. As I have written my story and as I have shared my story by speaking, I heal within my own life. And so those traumas that I have experienced, when I am able to articulate them in writing and in speaking, there's something magical that happens through the courage to be able to share that story. I'm very vulnerable when I share those stories, but it's like the Lord uses that experience of communicating that story to help heal those layers, and layer by layer. So it's not just the person out there in the audience that hears you that needs to hear your story. You need to hear your story as well, because it will not only bless them, but it will bless you as well.
Let me tell you, that's so true, Karen, because I have my therapist. I have a weekly therapist since I came back, because, well, I'm not shy in saying that. And Daisy, by the way, she was my guest in my podcast too. So Daisy, she always tells me that she loves how I decided to speak and to talk about this, because that has been part of my healing process. So everybody that's hearing this, don't be shy, speak, tell your story. Maybe sometimes people think that the story is not, you have a story. That world needs to hear your story. So coming to the end, Karen, a final reflection to the audience.
Yes, a final reflection is, this is your moment to shine. The time is now, and you are needed, and you need you. Not only does the world need you, and the world needs your message, but you need you as well. So show up for everyone and show up for yourself, because you will bless the world and you will bless your own life. And in blessing your life, you bless everyone in your circle. You bless your family, you bless your children, your grandchildren, and your posterity. And so it's a beautiful thing that you're doing when you are willing to share the story. And Jose, thank you for your lessons in leadership and for the ways that you bless my life, because you inspired me, and I was so touched. I have, that is one of my favorite, and one of my guests' favorite episodes is the interview with you. So I want you to know that you blessed me and you have blessed so many people, and I'm so proud of you for having your podcast, and thank you so much for having me as a guest today.
For the people that are here in this show today, I'm going to say Karen is an incredible human being. She's called the Queen of Empathy. She had the vulnerability to share her story. She's an incredible human being. If you want to have more visibility, you really need to tell the story. Please contact her. I'm going to leave all your contacts when this show will be aired. And, well, thank you for being here, Karen. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Jose. God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you're a leader, you need to hear this. Great leadership isn't about having followers. It's about making more leaders. The real measure of leadership isn't about power or position. It's about impact and influence. The best leaders uplift, mentor, and empower others to reach their full potential. Leadership isn't about control. It's about creating a culture where people feel valued, inspired, and ready to grow. Remember this. If you treat your employees like they make a difference, they will. Join us in transforming leadership into a movement. Watch this video and see the incredible difference it makes when leadership is about building leaders, not followers. What's the best leadership advice you've ever received? Drop it in the comments.